Welcome to a special edition of The World where we look back at the stories that shaped the Asia-Pacific region over the past year. From China's push for power in the Pacific to the assassination of Japan's Shinzo Abe, there were seismic shifts for many countries in our region. Let's start in the South Pacific, just north of Tonga, where in January an underwater volcano unleashed an enormous and catastrophic eruption, triggering a deadly tsunami.
Yesterday evening, the Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai volcano exploded. It's just 70 kilometres north of Tonga's capital, Nuku'alofa. The eruption was so powerful it sent ash up to 15 kilometres into the air, with shockwaves heard in Fiji. It caused a tsunami that has flooded the northern side of Tonga's main island, Tongatapu, including Nuku'alofa. As night fell, volcanic ash rained down and residents raced inland. The volcano has been active since November, with eruptions in December, but the massive underwater explosion had not been anticipated.
There hasn't been an event from a volcanic eruption and such an explosive eruption previously. So this is a big surprise.
Tsunami warnings were issued for other Pacific nations, with damage as far afield as Japan and Peru. So far, there are no reports of deaths or injuries in Tonga, but it has been impossible to gauge the full extent of the destruction due to power outages and damage to the country's sole underwater fibre optic cable. Australia and New Zealand are both planning to send surveillance planes tomorrow morning, provided the ash cloud has cleared. Until then, both governments are relying on satellite communications from their high commissions for information. As well as immediate aid, Tonga will need long-term help to repair damage to critical infrastructure. Melissa Clark, ABC News.
The assassination of Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister in July shocked the region and the world. Shinzo Abe was attending a low-key campaign rally in the country's west when he was shot and later pronounced dead at the hospital. The gunman was quickly taken into police custody, where he has since been held on mental evaluation. Our North Asia correspondent James Oaten filed this report from Nara in Japan.
2 gunshots. The first misses, the second does not. Bleeding and collapsing onto the ground, Shinzo Abe had been making a speech in Nara near Kyoto.
I heard he was having something like a toy, it looked like a bazooka, and then I heard a big noise.
The country's public broadcaster was showing the event live when the shots were fired. Witnesses say they saw a man wearing a grey T-shirt stepping back before firing for a second time.
He didn't run away after shooting, he was just staying there.
Security rushes to tackle the man as bystanders dash to their former leader. Police urge them to stay back, but crowds continue to converge. Within minutes, Abe is airlifted to hospital. Holding back tears, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida called the shooting a heinous act.
It is barbaric and malicious, and it cannot be tolerated. We will do everything we can. I would like to use the most extreme words available to condemn this act.
41-year-old local was arrested at the scene, reportedly a former member of the Japanese Navy. Tetsuya Yamagami told police he was dissatisfied with Abe and intended to kill him.
This kind of barbaric act is not acceptable, and we firmly condemn it.
Police say they seized gun-like equipment from the suspect, which witnesses say looked handmade.
I didn't expect anything like this would happen in Japan.
I'm shocked. He worked very hard as Prime Minister for a long time. I'm so shocked.
Well, the economic crisis in Sri Lanka brought down a president this year as public anger at the government bubbled over into violent protests. Gotabaya Rajapaksa agreed to resign after thousands of people stormed his official residence. The public had been enraged by the government's handling of the country's worst economic crisis in decades.
Extraordinary scenes of an uprising as protesters take over the president's home. Cooling off in the swimming pool at the most secure address in the country. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was evacuated the day before ahead of the planned demonstrations, but no one could have expected this. The presidential palace overrun by protesters, trying out the bedrooms, going through drawers in the bathrooms and celebrating in the banquet hall.
When you see the luxuries in this house, it is obvious that they don't have time to work for the country.
Protesters accuse the nation's leaders of corruption and blame them for the economic meltdown.
I feel very, very sad that they didn't go earlier, because had they gone earlier, there wouldn't have been any destruction. And it's time that we got all our stolen money back to this country.
Earlier in the day, security forces in Colombo attempted to hold the line. Barricades were torn away by the angry crowd. Tear gas didn't stop them. After months of protests, they'd had enough. And this time, they were determined to get to the seat of power. Tens of thousands surrounded the president's offices, demanding his resignation. They came from all over the country to protest against rampant inflation and crippling fuel, medicine and food shortages.
We must chase them out. I spend 1 day a week working and 5 days standing in queues.
In the evening, police tried to stop protesters breaking into the private home of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. It was set alight, even though he'd offered to resign. The leadership may change, but many here fear that won't be enough to end this deepening crisis.
Well, from the political heat of Sri Lanka to the searing heat of the Indian summer, which this year set new records and alarmed climate scientists. Part of the country's power grid buckled under the demand, while in the capital, an enormous landfill caught fire.
This gigantic pile of rubbish on the outskirts of Delhi is 17 stories high. For more than a week, it's been burning during a record-breaking heat wave. Researchers say it's further evidence climate change is accelerating.
It's very difficult. Our kids are young. They all have coughs and headaches.
Sunita lives and works at the landfill. Now she's surrounded by toxic fumes from the fire. She's also one of more than 1 billion Indians experiencing the hottest temperatures for March and April in more than a century. The majority of Indians work outside, unable to get any reprieve from the heat. People like Phul Singh carry up to 60 kilograms on their heads each day.
Obviously, the heat is affecting me, but I need money.
We have empty stomachs, so we have to work, whether it's hot, cold or stormy.
Scientists say the heatwave conditions being experienced in India is something they've been predicting for years as a result of climate change influenced by humans. They say scenes like this are a reminder to the international community about the threat of environmental destruction.
An estimated 33 million people were devastated by monsoonal floods in Pakistan by October 2022. 1,700 were killed by the floodwaters themselves, while the millions of displaced survivors then had to contend with homelessness, food shortages and a surge in waterborne diseases. Pakistan says the high-emitting countries that have contributed to climate change should be giving more to the aid effort.
Mud and water slam into villages, destroying roads and swallowing entire communities.
The floods caused incalculable damage. I don't think there's any house or building in the whole town left intact. This is total destruction.
Families are forced to camp along roadways, the only high ground they can find. And there's nowhere else to go if the waters rise any further.
Tents are our biggest need right now. We're short of food too, and our families are on the road.
There's been so much rain, it's created new waterways. taking homes with them. This newly built hotel was destroyed in a matter of minutes. The water rose so quickly, many people were caught out, left to salvage what they could. Aid is getting through to some communities, but many are still cut off. Pakistan's Prime Minister surveyed the flood-ravaged regions of Sindh province, where several hundred people have lost their lives. The UN says millions have been impacted. Many will have no home to go back to.
Well, months after the floods, Pakistan politics remained volatile, with ousted Prime Minister Imran Khan continuing to campaign against the government. Mr Khan was shot but survived an assassination attempt that killed one person and injured several others. The gunfire hit his vehicle while he was leading a protest convoy in the east of the country.
The protest convoy was like all the other marches Imran Khan has been holding around the country. But suddenly, a burst of automatic gunfire rang out. An injured Imran Khan was dragged away to safety and taken to hospital. The 70-year-old had been shot in the right leg. This is the gunman allegedly behind the attack, who was later caught. According to Pakistani police, he told them his aim was to shoot Imran Khan dead. At least one person was killed. Bystanders and other party members were also injured.
May Allah protect us. Imran Khan is all right. May Allah protect him.
Since Imran Khan lost the prime ministership, his popularity has grown. And if fresh elections were held, he believes he could win. This attempt to silence Imran Khan may only fuel his campaign. Avani Dias, ABC News.
Well, what started as a fun-filled Halloween celebration turned into a horrific tragedy in the South Korean capital of Seoul. At least 158 people, including 2 Australians, died in a crowd crush that began in an alleyway in the suburb of Itaewon. A warning that this report from our North Asia correspondent James Oaten does have confronting footage.
In a narrow alley, crushed against a wall. Many just couldn't escape. Around 100,000 people had come to this popular night spot to celebrate Halloween.
Oh my God, oh my God.
No one knows what set off the stampede. People came together for the first time since COVID restrictions were lifted to party, and the crowds were huge. When panic set in, they scrambled to get out, but it was near impossible. Many fell and dozens were knocked unconscious. Bystanders rushed to help the injured. Emergency vehicles struggled to get to the site through roads jammed with people.
It looked like a scene from a movie, like things happening during a war. It was completely out of control.
The Itaewon area in Seoul is full of nightclubs, bars and restaurants. It's the favourite venue for a night out for locals, expatriates and international travellers. For these young survivors who walked away, the scars will remain.
Towards the end of 2022, China undertook an immense shift in its COVID policies after the most widespread protests in decades. They began in November as vigils for the victims of a fatal fire in Xinjiang province, but quickly grew into a powerful pushback against China's zero COVID restrictions.
In Shanghai, people chanted in the streets, "We want freedom." Protesters yelling at police, "You're supposed to serve the people." In scenes extraordinary for China, they could be heard calling on the country's leader Xi Jinping and the Communist Party to step down. After 3 years of the strictest COVID measures in the world, people's anger and frustration appears to have reached breaking point. Protests are spreading in cities and universities across the country. A fire in the far western Xinjiang region that killed 10 people, triggering unprecedented public dissent. People were trapped in an apartment building under a strict COVID lockdown. Fire trucks were initially blocked from entering the compound and were instead forced to hose the flames from afar.
When the rescuers were on their way, there were so many obstacles to the building, locks on the door. By the time they arrived, people were already dead.
At least hundreds took to the streets of Xinjiang's capital, Urumqi, in a rare act of defiance. The anger about overzealous measures has reached Beijing, with people tearing down fences. In the central city of Henan, scenes of surreal unrest at the world's biggest iPhone factory, partly fuelled by a hapless response to a COVID outbreak there.
Well, tensions flared in the Taiwan Strait when the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi touched down in Taipei in August. Ms. Pelosi was the highest-ranking US official to visit Taiwan in over 25 years, provoking China to respond with a show of force. But it was Beijing's economic sanctions which really hit hard.
The first shots fired, thankfully, from a safe distance. Taiwanese TV showing rockets launched from the Chinese coast towards the far side of the Taiwan Strait. Beijing is beaming pictures of its navy testing missiles and conducting exercises around the island to vent its fury at Nancy Pelosi becoming the highest-level US visitor to Taiwan in 25 years. Some people in China believe war is imminent.
I think Pelosi's visit is a good thing. It gives us an opportunity to surround Taiwan, then to use this chance to take Taiwan by force, earlier than expected.
Taiwan's forces are on high alert and patrolling their coastline as China's leader Xi Jinping orders his troops into Taiwan's territorial waters for drills for the first time. Taiwan's government says the large no-go zones drawn up for the exercises amount to an economic blockade, with ships and aircraft forced to change routes.
Our government will not only actively strengthen its self-defence capabilities, but will also maintain close ties with like-minded countries like the United States.
But this is a pressure campaign on multiple fronts. Having banned more than 2,000 Taiwanese food companies from exporting to China this week, Beijing has added citrus fruit and wax apples to existing bans on pineapples.
It's these economic hits that could really cut deep. Taiwanese are long used to military sabre rattling from China, but banning key exports just months before local elections could really apply pressure.
A contentious security pact signed between Solomon Islands and China took centre stage in Australia's federal election campaign after the Pacific nation rebuffed pleas not to proceed with the deal. Officials here feel that the deal could eventually see Beijing establish a military presence less than 2,000 kilometres from the Queensland coast.
Outside the People's Parliament, security tightens. Inside, a defiant Prime Minister lays out a new vision.
We entered into an arrangement with China with our eyes wide open.
Manasseh Sogavare has ignored warnings from Australian spy chiefs and politicians alike, signing a security agreement which could reshape the strategic landscape well beyond Honiara. The capital has been rocked by successive riots over the years, and the Prime Minister thinks China can help stop future unrest.
We intend to beef up and strengthen our police capability and capacity to deal with any future instability by properly equipping our police.
The announcement came out of the blue, not in Solomon Islands, but in Beijing, where a foreign ministry official revealed the deal was done.
China has always been a builder of peace and a promoter of stability in the South Pacific region.
The final text remains secret, but a leaked draft goes well beyond police cooperation, establishing a framework for Chinese troops to enter and vessels to dock.
I am extremely disappointed in Australia. The Australian government has been too soft on this issue and too trusting.
Stephen Jedgetts, ABC News, Canberra.
Australian journalist Cheng Lei has spent another year in detention in China, still awaiting the verdict of a closed trial after it was deferred. Ms Cheng, who had worked for Chinese state media and has been held since August 2020, faced charges of illegally supplying state secrets overseas.
Justice Beijing style. A closed court, police hassling journalists outside, and a diplomatic deal to access the trial discarded.
As you've seen, we've just been denied entry into the trial. This is deeply concerning, unsatisfactory and regrettable. We can have no confidence in the validity of the process which is conducted in secret.
Chinese authorities cited national security to keep everyone in the dark about what Cheng Lei allegedly did wrong. The former anchor for Beijing's English news and propaganda channel is charged with providing intelligence or state secrets to foreigners. Chinese authorities have refused to reveal any further details since state security agents took her from her Beijing apartment 19 months ago. Her lawyer is barred from discussing the case, but said heavy-duty PPE made it hard to see her demeanour in court.
Our hope is that we will see a fair trial, and it's a trial that occurs very quickly.
The trial was over in just one morning, but that doesn't mean a verdict and sentence will be announced anytime soon. Another Australian tried for espionage 11 months ago is still waiting for an outcome.
The secrecy and uncertainty have been crushing for Cheng Lei's family in Australia. They've released a statement saying her 12-year-old daughter and 10-year-old son miss her immensely and hope to reunite as soon as possible. Bill Birtles, ABC News, Taipei.
Once a giant of Malaysian politics, former Prime Minister Najib Razak ends this year in a jail cell after the country's top court rejected his appeal against his corruption conviction. He started serving a 12-year sentence for embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars from a state-run fund that he helped set up when he was in power.
Outside Malaysia's federal court, Najib Razak still has strong support among his base. But his stunning downfall is complete. The full court upheld a guilty conviction on charges of corruption and money laundering linked to the looting of the 1MDB state fund Najib chaired. Investigators say $6.5 billion was stolen. But Najib maintains his innocence.
I did not get my justice, and I didn't get a fair trial based on its principles.
Najib now faces 12 years behind bars and a $68 million fine for his role in the scheme that implicated high-ranking officials worldwide.
Of course, we are very sad because we lost the appeal.
After the verdict, Najib was whisked away to Kajang prison on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur, making the 69-year-old Malaysia's first former leader to be imprisoned. Najib, who faces several more trials over the allegations, could still apply for a review of the decision. And with Najib's old party back in power, a pardon can't be ruled out. Anne Barker, ABC News.
Well, there are few figures in history who enjoyed the recognition and respect that Queen Elizabeth II commanded throughout the world. Her death in September saw tributes flow in from right across the globe, and her funeral was attended by presidents, prime ministers, kings and queens.
Sadness and condolences from the subcontinental Commonwealth. Flags flying at half-mast ahead of official mourning. The Queen's death brings an opportunity for older Indians to reflect on the monarch's lasting influence.
I would remember her as a very fine person and a very graceful lady.
That's like our mother's figure. She has attained such a level that everybody loves her.
While others are torn about India's history under British rule.
They had invaded India and ruled us for about 200 years. But then still Indian and British people have got a good relationship.
It's clear this country is moving further and further away from its colonial past. This week, Prime Minister Narendra Modi changed the name of Rajpath, or Kingsway behind me, to remove that reference to a painful past. From former colonies in the Pacific to British territories overseas, headlines brought news that history had been made, and tributes flowed in every language. A fascination and fondness for Her Majesty stretches right across the Atlantic. The Union Jack replaced stars and stripes on the US Capitol's famous avenue.
Have you spoken to the King? I know him. I haven't spoken to him. I did not call him yet.
The President confirming he will attend the Queen's funeral, though, in more than a week. Avani Dias, ABC News.
And finally to Port Moresby, where in April our Papua New Guinea correspondent Natalie Whiting met some young women who are vying to be crowned 2022's Hiri Queen. The pageant, which aims to preserve some of PNG's culture, includes the arrival of a traditional sailing ship to the capital city's shores.
It is my rightful culture inheritance passed down from my ancestors.
For generations, months-long trading voyages ended like this on Port Moresby's shores.
In the old days, the lakatois was the only transportation that they had because they didn't have any roads. Reigniting the lakato is like, it brings the culture back, it just takes us back in time. Motu Koetapu Assembly is proud to host the Hiri Mola Festival annually to ensure that the culture is preserved.
Each of the contestants represents one of 10 traditional villages that still exist around Port Moresby.
Our 10 Hanenamos will be judged on 2 categories. That's the individual introduction and the question and answer on cultural knowledge. What are the 3 most popular names for Motuan Lagatois?
The 3 most popular names for the Lagatois are Bogebara, Kevaubara, and Oalabara. Thank you.
We believe that not only are we empowering our young women to learn and preserve the culture, but we're also empowering them to believe in themselves and to use this platform so that they can achieve their own goals and aspirations.
So right now we're just getting her prepared for the crowning.
I come from a clan of Hiri Queens. In this quest, Hiri Hanenamo is something that I wake up to every day because I come from the tribe that my family, my mothers, my aunties were once queen.
Enjoy, embrace it, and all the best.
Because of my tattooist, she's not just an ordinary lady, but she's my great-grandmother. And having her still on rocking like a young girl, I'm very thankful for her.
Each tattoo has its own meaning and they often signal initiation into womanhood. Traditionally, they were permanently applied using thorns and charcoal.
Being born into the Motuan culture and lifestyle, it is that natural instinct which motivated me to participate in this cultural show. And my culture is my identity. If I know my culture, then I'll know where I come from.
I worry about culture because in these changing times, it's fading. And with these events we have, it's important that we have to be proud of it and we have to give all our best in order to preserve it, for it to live on for our next generation.
Each contestant must reenact seeing a Lakatoi ship returning from a voyage, dancing in celebration and alerting the village.
Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we have all been waiting for, the 2021 Miss Hiri Hanenamo goes to Hari Hanenamo, Lakatoi Governor, Raila English.
We all know it's a modern world, but maintaining our culture through these activities and these events, it is very important. Just as in other countries or other villages, they value their culture, so do we. We value our culture very much.
And Natalie's report ends the show. The World will be back in 2023 from January the 2nd on the ABC News Channel and on iView. I'm Bev O'Connor. Thanks so much for your company. Bye-bye.